Hey guys, God bless you. This is Bible Wise Money. I am Carlos. My wife Alicia is right over there. Quite often I get the question, how much can a single person who is selling items on e-commerce through thrifting, items that they have thrifting, what is the top end of how much they can actually sell? I'm going to tell you that inside the video. As always, if you appreciate the content, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. In the book of Matthew, Jesus shares a parable about the mustard seed. He said the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds, but it grows into one of the biggest trees. And if you've ever seen a picture of a mustard tree, it's a huge, massive tree. It starts small, but ultimately it multiplies over the course of time and it grows into something which is really, really large. It's the same principle for e-commerce. We have to start where we are, oftentimes start small, and then grow it into something larger. I advise against someone who might say, yeah, I'm going to put $5,000 on a credit card and I'm going to go into this, and you haven't even learned the lessons of e-commerce. And this is one of the things that we desire to do in this channel. Here's a quiz for you that's going to demonstrate that. If you had a choice, if I can give you $1 million today, or I can give you a penny today and double it every day for 30 days, which would you rather have? So $1 million up front, or on the first of the month, I give you a penny. The next day, I give you 2 pennies. The next day, I give you 4 pennies. The next day, I give you 8 pennies and 16 pennies and 32 pennies and 64 pennies and go for 30 days. Which would you rather have? Most people would say, I'd rather have the $1 million. Carlos, cut me the check. In fact, if you take 1 penny and you double it every single day for 30 days, you have $5.3 million. That is the power of multiplication. Now, I wish I could tell you that I could take a penny and double it every day on e-commerce, because this challenge would be done in about 10 days. I can't do that. And I don't know that anyone can. I'm not saying stop all your investments to go into e-commerce. I think e-commerce may be one avenue and one revenue stream. And if you want to have savings, you should. If you want to do some level of investments, you should. If you want to own a house or get into real estate, you probably should. So there's lots of other methods, and we'll talk about that down the road, because part of that is like, how do you manage when you start really growing and you start coming into some level of either income or wealth? What do you do with it to safeguard it? How do you do things that are wise and prudent with it? That's one of the things we desire to do on this channel, Bible Wise Money. So stay tuned and you are going to hear more about that. So I often get this question that if an individual is thrifting, how much is the most that they can expect to sell in a year? So in my time of selling on eBay, I've estimated the most that a single person working on their own, selling on e-commerce items that they have thrifted, is about $200,000 a year if they're doing it full time. There are always going to be exceptions to the rules. There could be an individual who is working on their own who sells in excess of that, but the vast majority of individuals will top out at about $200,000 a year. Now, I want to quickly add, I'm not including if you were to source by buying things via retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, wholesale, if you manufacture your own products, if you do drop shipping, if you do consignment. I really don't know if there is an upper limit. The upper limit is probably the person's time, but easily would exceed $1 million. There are many, many stories about individuals who are making over $1 million of sales by using those ways of sourcing for e-commerce. But since we have intentionally limited ourselves, at least the initial stage of the challenge, we are thrifting. Later on, we'll introduce as we teach you how to do some of the other methods. But initially, we are limiting ourselves to thrifting through thrift stores, through secondhand stores, through estate sales, through yard sales. I had thought about this question some time ago, really years ago, and independent of anyone else's thoughts, I came up with that number. And I thought it was interesting just within the last couple of weeks. There are a couple of very successful online resellers who do this on their own, and they were willing to share on their platforms. And in one case, the individual was averaging about $50,000 a quarter. And he's very successful. That's $200,000 a year. And the other individual has long since eclipsed $1 million. But he started on thrifting, and he also indicated that the top end is about $200,000 a year. So I felt very vindicated because here are independent sources who are saying the same thing that I had come up with. And again, there could be an exception. So hopefully someone tunes in and say, Carlos, I'm well past 200,000. I'm a solo person, and I just do this on my own. All I'm doing is thrifting, and I've exceeded that. And I think that's great. I think the vast majority of people will not. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's a limitation on time. Obviously, if you are working independently on your own, you can only spend so much time running around to sources to buy things. So that becomes a challenge. It becomes a constraint. Number two, in my experience, my limited experience now, because it's only been a few weeks, but I've also heard this confirmed through other sources. People who donate to things like Goodwill, Salvation Army, they don't typically donate high value items. So it becomes very difficult to find items that are probably over like $30. I can walk into most thrift stores today and find items between $1 and $10. I can walk into any thrift store, probably find 10 items that I can purchase between $1 and $10 and sell them probably between $20 and $30 pretty easily. However, it's not easy to go into the same thrift store and find 10 items that I could purchase for $100 that I could sell for $200 to $300. Every now and then you'll find some, but it's not easy to do, and they don't come along very often. So that top end is about $200,000. Now you could say, well, can you retire on $200,000, or can you leave your job for $200,000 a year in sales? It's possible, but it depends on a lot of factors, including where do you live? Are you in a high-cost state like Northeast, like New York, like California? It depends. Are you in a low-cost area, maybe somewhere in the middle of the country, or maybe a low-tax state like Texas, or maybe a place like Florida where many things are very affordable? It also depends on your family composition. Are you a one-person household? Are there two earners in your household? Are you the primary earner? Do you have children in the house? So it's really, for me, it's hard to say. You'd have to really tailor it to your own situation. I will say this, and this becomes critical. If you were to sell about $200,000 a year, which I contend means you'd have to do it full time, you would have to pay about $65,000, about a third of it roughly, for your costs. These are costs of shipping, costs for eBay, costs for all your costs. It could be your gas money to get around. It could be cost of operating your business. About a third of it you're going to have to pay out. And then even beyond that, you probably need about another third to keep the business operating, because you need to continually replenish your business. So if you had $200,000 in sales, maybe $65,000 goes in fees, brings you down to $135,000. Maybe now there's $65,000 you're going to have to reinvest in inventory to keep your sales up. That leaves you about $70,000. If you're doing this on your own and this is your full-time work, you have to consider the cost of benefits. You have to consider the cost of taxes. So it's probably the same as a full-time job that pays between $45,000, $50,000 a year, maybe $55,000. Again, it depends on what part of the country you live in. So $2,000 in sales quickly boils down to about the same as earning about $50,000 a year. So that might be disappointing to some, but that's the formula that you want to think for. So as I go into thrifting, I'm keeping that formula in mind. So let me demonstrate it. If I go to a supplier and I say, I want to buy your pen, how much is your pen? And he says the pen is $1. I will then purchase this pen. I now have a pen that I can resell, assuming it's a good price. My goal is to get $3 for this. So I want 3 times as much as what I started with, 3 times as much as what I paid. And so now I sell it to the person next to me, online, of course, and that person pays me $3. So you say, well, that's great. I took $1 and I made it into $3. The challenge here, as I just demonstrated, is I have to pay eBay, and I have to pay Amazon, I have to pay gas and other costs for operating a business, and that money goes away. So what I'm left with now is probably about $2. And out of the $2, some portion of this I have to now reinvest into buying more merchandise. So what I'm left with is less than $2. So you might say, Carlos, you started with 1, you finished with 2. That's not really very exciting. You're absolutely right. And so I want to introduce another concept besides just the ability to multiply your money. Some people call it the profit margin. In this case, what I just demonstrated is I started with 1, I have 3. That is 3 times as much. 3 times 1 is 3. So I call that 3x. My goal is to do at least 3x. If I can do 4x, and in some purchases I will. I'll do 4x, 5x, 10x is possible. I could buy an item for $1 and sell it for 10. I'm at 10x. But there are going to be some I'm not going to do that well. So I want to average them out, so I'm doing 3x. So the same principle will work if I buy an item for $100. So now I see an item that I want for $100 and said, hey, I like that item. Will you sell it to me? The fellow says, sure. The supplier sells me this for $100. Nice. I then turn around and my desire is to sell it, and I sell it for $300. Now, as I just mentioned, I now have to pay eBay and all my costs. I am left with $200, and out of this $200, I have to set aside money to make more purchases and continue to grow the business. I'd ask someone who's very knowledgeable on and has run a successful e-commerce $1 million business. I asked him, I said, how long should you wait until you actually pay yourself and you take money out of the business? His answer surprised me. He said 10 years. I don't think you have to work 10 years, but I will say this: in my 8 years of online eBay selling, in 8 years, almost about $275,000 as of today, I took very little money out. Most of the money I used to pay my costs and to grow the business. So if you think e-commerce is for you, you really have to have a long-term strategy that's not even 10 months. It's got to be probably in years. And if you already have a good, steady job, my advice is start part-time and start building up until you can get to a point where you may be able to consider, hey, this is working, it's very successful, and I can actually consider changing jobs and go full-time as an e-commerce seller. And you could determine that does not make sense to do that. Like for me right now, it does not make sense for me to do that. Maybe at some point it will. It's not going to make sense for me to do it if I'm only thrifting. That's it for this video. As I had promised you before, I have 3 more videos coming up in probably the next 6 days on sourcing, but I wanted you to get this lesson first. So the goal again is, as I go out thrifting, is to do 3x. For every $1 I spend, I want to be able to sell it for $3. Keep that in mind. God bless you. See you inside the next video. Because I'm walking around with $100 bills, but watch carefully. Bam. But I need to tell you that because I live in New York and I live in the Bronx, and I know some roughneck people. They're all in church too. And they might be, yeah, Carlos, I saw you on YouTube and you had C notes. Yeah, now we're going to come after you.